Thanks, Bethany, and thanks everyone for joining around the world. And thanks to the iSport Connect team for continuing to host events such as this to help our industry progress. It's an exciting time, and every year is bringing more and more things that we need to ultimately learn about on how to better serve our fans with more exciting moments, more exciting experiences, and overall increase the value of our organization. With me, I have Emma from Accenture. And Leo from Blast Esports. But prior to letting them go on here, let me just jump in and go back with the definition. If everyone was part of the first session, I know there's some people that weren't, so let's just take a quick step back here and just really understand what is the blockchain. And whether it's public or private, blockchain, at its core is a real-time ledger of records. It could be documenting a monetary transaction or something of value. However, at the end, it's a trusted account of exchange that has been publicly validated. The record is stored independent from any central authority. And since every record is encrypted and timestamped, and users can only access and edit the block that they own through a private key, it's extremely secure. Blockchain helps streamline transactions efficiently without requiring intermediaries to manage the process. So how is this revolutionary in practical terms for the sports industry? Here to help unpack that question are my two panelists, Emma and Leo. Emma, why don't we start with the 30,000-foot consultant's view? How are you explaining the opportunity of blockchains to your clients?
I think when we think about blockchain and we think about it in the context of distributed ledger technology, then you can isolate this notion the blockchain is connected to, that it necessarily has to be connected to a cryptocurrency. And you can instead start to think about a data entity and really wanting to understand that data entity. And as you talked about there, being decentralized, but having consistency over its state and all the states that it's been through. And in the example on the last session around something like as simple as a ticket, understanding that as that digital data, that token, which is the ticket, gets passed around, that you've got that entire history that lives with that data entity within the actors who are working in it. And what that allows us to do is it allows us to really understand the history of that element, and we can then start to think about what that could mean into how we manage a supply chain, or how we manage individual identity, or how we think about managing those cryptocurrencies or crypto-like currencies in their duration. And that's the type of thing that it starts to unlock for us and really drive a different way of how we can start to solve problems.
Yeah, absolutely. Leo, jumping over to gaming. Gaming has had the kind of exchange and use of digital goods prevalent, throughout the community for a number of years. Where are you as a company, as Blast, currently in the state of blockchain uses, and where do you kind of see you progressing as the industry moves forward?
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, I might go back a step again to help out, because I imagine our brand awareness of Blast Esports is a notch down from Accenture. So Blast Esports, we're an esports rights holder. Gaming and esports, as you've introduced us. Gaming is if you have kids or yourself, you play and they're playing a game of FIFA, that's gaming. If they're playing a game of FIFA and there's a league structure and a competitive outcome, they could be semi-professionals, they could be professionals, whatever it is, that then becomes esports, and that's where we come in. So we own a big league in a big esport called Counter-Strike. Blast Premier is our league, and then we've owned new IPs and formats in a whole variety of other games over the last couple of years, with more to come. So that would have included Fortnite, Apex Legends, Dota, Valorant, and there's more to come. So my role within that is our VP of Commercial. So when I look at blockchain, back around to your question, and we can maybe get into some of the nuances within gaming and esports, and why within the sports industry, we've already been using quite a lot of functions of things like NFTs already and built in the gaming environment. I'm always looking at blockchain almost as a customer as well as a seller. How can we use this technology and the front end consumer facing applications of it, NFTs, partnerships with crypto brands, whatever these things might be now, and new things that will come in the future, to drive our business forward commercially. Some of those are new commercial activities. NFTs would be a good example of that. And some are replacing our current activities with more efficient, better ways of working because blockchain offers that as a solution. So some of my viewpoints might be slightly less 30,000 feet than Emma's as we go through it, which is probably quite good. So we can talk a little bit about how we're trying to drive our business forward commercially through the technology that's now at our.
No, yeah, thanks. And I think the way that I wanted to kind of frame this was, to go high level and then kind of drill down into practical examples. So if I go back to you, Emma, then and just say or just ask you, putting a sports rights holder on hat on yourself and just looking at the kind of the core revenue streams that come into a sports rights holder, right? You have broadcasting and the means of getting the content pushed out to all the different fans that aren't there in stadium. Yes, you have ticketing and people that are coming into the stadium. Certainly, you have the food and beverage and the merchandise that they consume while at the building. And of course, then the fourth one really is sponsorship and the brand engagement that happens with those fans. If you're looking at revenue streams, which ones kind of pop out as something which you would start looking at as a rights holder as being interesting ones to think through how it works within the blockchain environment?
Well, I think if we start with the concept around NFT and the IP that exists around that, and the opportunity that's existing, increasingly scaling around breaking up what might be an entire broadcast into value moments across it, and how you attach value into those individual NFTs and the look at the distribution, you start to get into something which has been well exercised within something like the music industry. And I think there's a relatively, dare I say it, relatively straightforward use case within that the way you can start to think about the distribution of those data elements, those NFTs, across multiple users, and then how you monetize that distribution to make sure it comes back to the rights owner. And if we just assume that we know who the rights owner on that content is, and I know that's not always a straightforward thing, but that's a very clear use case for me. But I think as you went through your kind of 4 key examples, you start to look at things like supply chain, and you start looking at some of the challenges around supply chain that exists. And at the end of that last panel, they were talking about, some of the challenges that have existed around sustainability across supply chains. These sorts of things can also be really important and can really help ensure that you've got integrity within your supply chain. And it would be easy to lift some of the working solutions that have already been used. And what that allows the sports owners to do is to have that sense of integrity within the supply chain. It makes it harder for fraudulent goods to be produced. From the consumer, you're creating a different type of consumer experience because they know that what they're buying is the legitimate good. There's clear opportunity there. I think we need to be careful that we don't blur the line. So there are different uses for blockchain, rather than getting into the specifics, because you can think about it from the preservation. So you're making sure that you don't want a piece of false news, a piece of doctored content, a piece of untrustworthy merchandise to be allowed to be distributed. And you can use blockchain and that tokenization to provide the authenticity and show that there's not been any tampering. And I think that's one thing to really think about. But I think the other thing to really think about across those different categories that you talked about is around the notion of how you have that ownership of the asset, and you're managing the IP that sits with that asset. And when you pull it apart across those kind of 2 themes, I think it's then easier to apply into each of those use cases and think about how do you monetize? What is it you create if you solve in a different way using blockchain? So then you can start to prioritize which ones you go with first.
Absolutely. Leo, going back to you and building upon the the IP and the music and the images and such, I think it's very relevant for your world in esports, as there are lots of different components that go into and just due to its nature, purely digital the vast majority of the time. What are you thinking through when it comes to the protection of IP, yes, but also the further participation that can go into the value chain, that having that trusted ledger associated with intellectual property?
Yeah, and what are we thinking about? Everything, because there's so much. I'm going to try and be a little specific. Esports is taking something digital, a computer game, distributing it digitally for us, because we're a league and rights and media rights owner of the competitive action that takes place on the screen the players are competing in. So we're a tech company, really, nearly first and foremost. We're a tech company and a sports and entertainment rights holder. So blockchain knits those two really neatly together. So this year we've been in a bit of a trial mode with a few applications, and NFTs is one of them when we come to it later. And obviously, is with a commercial head on that was one where we could start to seek some commercial return and revenue against by creating exactly what Emma's saying. I love the phrase, is where can we find value? So where can we find value in a few key areas? One for us is to our viewer. So our viewer should be experiencing our largely digital product as a digital tech savvy young person generally. They should be looking for and receiving more than they can from an analog product that they receive digitally. So NFL, soccer, beach volleyball, whatever traditional sport or entertainment, concerts you want to think of, or the audience want to think of from their own world, are predominantly analog, and we're forcing IP distribution and networks and better digitization of that. But we're actually more digital from conception. So how can we package up exactly what I'm saying, moments, content, features, interactivity around that experience we're offering, which is digital from the front end to the back end? And that's how we're starting to look at blockchain and NFTs as content moments, and they can be a lot more and will be a lot more in different to content moments as we go forward. The IP is interesting because we own the IP of our leagues, as any good sports rights holders or esports rights holders should do. The content that takes place on our time or in our league or in our structure or is ours. Where, without getting too nitty gritty, and we've been doing at the forefront of this for this year, is we know our IP is our IP. The partners that you use behind the scenes, and that's where we're starting to think about how between the user experience and purchase or experience or acquisition for free, however they're going to receive and benefit and watch or own this piece of content, or a digital Pokemon card type thing, or whatever they're going to get, where's that ownership lie? Because it should be with them. So the IP thing for us as a legal rights holder, we have it, we own it, and we're distributing it out. The actual consideration that's a bit nitty gritty is just making sure that the partners and the tech applications we've got are speaking to it being our IP, and the behind the scenes happens. But the value proposition is really what we're keying in, because where I think good sports, commercially minded sports writers should be looking is not going, right, how can we see the headline, right? Something goes on auction for sale for $400,000, and I want $400,000. So how do I get the $400,000? And what it should be is, how do I offer a value to my customer and a relationship with my customer, and give them something extra that the blockchain technology and front-facing applications of it have, that is then something they might want to buy. And then you can look at the scale of it. So do I want to create 10,000 of these things for $100 and make it that way, or do I want one key? What is there? And I think that's where we've been from day one, but that's where we should all be looking at, is rather than going $400,000 backwards, what's the value offering and how do we build up and out? And we need to be much more product owners to more of a tech language as we consider these kind of front-facing commercial applications, I think.
Yeah, I mean, my next question was really just building on something that you just said, and that, we've had lots of headline gripes recently about the revenue component. I mean, just yesterday, McGuigan came out from the Mavericks saying that he felt the revenue potential of NFTs could turn into a top 3 revenue source. But yeah, besides selling that NFT highlight clip or moment or whatever that portion that someone wants to have forever or exchange or whatever it is. What are some of the other benefits? I think through it, and I think it's further value add, like you mentioned, and different ways to engagement. Of course, with my data hat on, it's another means of a touch point of the engagement with the brand and the fan, and that's obviously generating more first party data. Maybe back to you, Emma. Besides the revenue component for NFTs, what are some of the other benefits that you're hearing about?
So I think I'm just going to play a little bit to Leo was talking there a little bit about, and really talking about experience. Like you're going to create some new experience. If we think about the consumer of whether it's they're spending a whole load of money on a shirt, or whether they want to buy a show reel or whatever it is, that they're buying an experience which is something really differentiated for them, which is giving them some value which they're prepared to pay for. And that is only going to go faster. So I think if we think about NFTs and distributed ledger in the context of consuming sports the way it's consumed today, it's probably not the right way to think about it. And what I'm understanding from what you're saying, it's about creating new experiences when you think about it in the world of esports, and I think that applies to everybody. So you look at some of the work that's moving really quickly at the moment, when you get this interlock between different emerging technologies. So the emergence of mixed reality coming in to create really different type of experiences with that whole that's encompassed in a very rich NFT, that you're creating an experience that somebody wants to consume and buy. You've created that value in your value chain, and that's giving something that's really different. And the reason I think it's important that people think about this is because if you're just trying to put more money into an existing system, there's actually quite a significant investment, because you're talking about a traditional analog sports organization potentially becoming a tech company. When Leo talked about what they're doing at Blast, they sound like a tech company. They sound like many of the guys I work, many of our clients. And I think that's an investment, and it's moving into a new world that's a hybrid between the physical and the digital world, and that takes investment to then unlock this new value. Now, the value is definitely there to be unlocked, but I think that strategic view of where you want to go is really important, rather than just jumping onto I feel like I could have a better supply chain. And the second thing I would say, that to get to that jump, whether it's to have a more sustainable supply chain or anything else, actually it's about using an ecosystem, because a traditional organization doesn't have to do this on their own. They can partner with the tech companies, with the small, whether they're small or large, to help build out these ecosystems, but they can also create these consortiums, and then it becomes a shared investment where together you create value that consumers want to consume, or other actors want to be a part of, and they will pay, other organizations will pay to be a part of that. So I do think it's important, as we think about this, we think about the journey to get there, to create these new experiences, to unlock that value, because it's a shift strategically from a traditional analog. I like the use, Leo, of that analog sports company.
And I guess going along with the theme of, I guess you can loosely group it into digital transformation, or that type of overriding things that organizations are looking at, full stop. How do you get started? How do you evaluate the business case? How do you stack it up against all the other different things that people are getting pitched to do, and help them become more digital and less analog? How do you kind of figure out where to maybe test, or how to sample a blockchain use case?
So some things don't change. You need to do some old school business case modeling to say, here's what we think the market opportunity, here's where we think the value, this is the cost to do it. Let's start small. Progress over perfection. We don't have to solve everything here. Let's try something out. Let's be prepared to make a mistake. Let's be prepared to go, we've got 3 priorities. We're going to go with this one first because actually the business case looks best. We'll start small, we'll test it, and we'll go again. And if that one doesn't work, let's assess what wasn't quite right, and we'll go again. The problem is you also need to have that North Star of where you want to go, Dave. And this is really important, because otherwise you get stuck. And this is true of any organization wanting to really take advantage of all that's coming in from a digital perspective and to start on this blockchain and really think about how they can do this. It's about making sure they've also got a North Star of where they're heading, so they don't just end up with multiple perfectly formed prototypes, but they can't scale them. And I think that scaling point sometimes gets missed. So my suggestion is you look at your own situation, you test against some simple business case type measures that you're looking to, and you think, but you have in mind that strategic direction where you want to go, which is going to be that vision of where digital and analog are going to come together to create something that creates new value for your organization at scale. But Leo, I'm sure you have real examples of where you've done this at Blast.
Cool. Oh, yeah, this is good. Like I was waiting for Dave. Yeah. So how do you get started? Sounds like you contact Emma at Accenture.com. She'll get you going. Use code iSportConnect for a discount, right? So what are we doing and what have we done? I'll take a back step a little bit. So in gaming and esports, and we hear that gaming is worth tens of billions, 100 billion, bigger than film and sport all combined and whatever else. A lot of the money that people have been spending in gaming, in Fortnite, in FIFA, is actually not based on blockchain tech specifically, but really similar customer experience of what blockchain can achieve through things like NFTs. So some examples just to make it easy. In Fortnite, people, generally young people, are downloading, I'll use a real sport, Neymar as a character, so they compete as Neymar. They're downloading Marvel Avengers Assembles characters, so they compete as whoever. They're downloading Mandalorian, so they compete as Mandalorian. In Counter-Strike, again, where we have a league, we did work in Fortnite. In Counter-Strike, we have a league. They're downloading, or they're obtaining or buying skins and then trading skins, which are cosmetics, onto their weapon they want to use when they play. All these things I'm talking about there, and going back to the point about value, are things that are totally cosmetic. They're like an avatar. They're like somebody in the chat who might have their face instead of their initials. These are totally cosmetic and $1 billion industries on cosmetics within a video gaming environment. So our audience who are tuning in and watching our tournaments and we're engaging with our fan base are so attuned to recognizing the value. Whereas people my age and up maybe are thinking, well, why would I buy a digital thing? It's valueless. The audience that we're reaching and new audiences coming through are used to these as things that they're willing and already do spend a lot of money on. And for the parents amongst you who get your credit card allowance for your kid with Fortnite will know exactly what I'm talking about. Some of them are cosmetic and some of them are performance-based. FIFA, you buy player packs and cards to have better players to put into your dream team, so you've got a better chance of beating your mate or the computer. So you're also used to paying for performance. So before you've done that, you've got a global economy of billions of people buying essentially NFTs within the gaming environment. So that's what we're trying to tap into, that experience, that audience base. Because if they're already doing this, what are we asking them to do next that we're contributing either an experience for or an outcome for? Cosmetic, performance, utility. Can I move the camera angle around in this content and film it fully 3D and own that as an NFT and hear a voiceover from the player that did the amazing Fortnite shot to win the Battle Royale and win, a tournament we did the other day, a $3 million prize pool, right, in a 4-day tournament. So when the guy wins that shot, can I hear him talking over it and what he thought and what he did and how stressed or happy he was and then what he did afterwards, and own that unique piece? What's that experience? And we think that audience base are ready for it. I can't quite remember the question. Ecosystem, Emma, was a really key one as well, right? I think a slightly untapped piece that we've not heard much around in front-facing applications and revenue drivers and experience drivers, and to your point, Dave, acquisition of users, or at least engagement with users and individuals. That to me seems where a lot of the big blockchain and tech platforms are heading, having customers on their platform. Binance have announced they're really rolling out an NFT platform using their tech. We're partnered with Coinbase at the moment as a big player, and we've also had a different NFT partner. I would imagine that companies like that will also be looking at how they use all their user bases who have wallets to then bring them over to an NFT exchange platform. The NFT we created and we trialed, back to the question of where do you start, we did an NFT product that had a beginning and an end. in Counter-Strike, the game we have a lot of activity in, chickens are very iconic. They run around the maps and they're very iconic. So we made our own animated gamified chickens in teams of 5, like the game, and you could buy a chicken, and then you could buy, in effect, bonuses or power-ups to customize it, and it would gamify and animate. So then maybe you gave it a special cosmetic weapon, or maybe made it gave it a different hat, and you built your ideal team of chickens, so you had your own team. Cool. What we then really were interested in directing and learning from was, if I trade my chicken's hat, I can't believe I'm on a forum saying this out loud, but if I trade my digital chicken's hat with Emma, who's got a really cool, in her collection, she's got a really cool weapon skin or design, or maybe a cool coloring on the feathers of her chicken that she got. If we trade them, then my chicken changes, her chicken changes, and we get an interaction and experience. So the thing we've bought doesn't stay static like a player card does or a physical item does. It can keep evolving, and it can keep changing, and it can keep growing. And if you build, Emma's point there around ecosystems, and your point earlier around Dave, around users and activate, how these people are going. Suddenly there, what we trialed was creating an entire environment where we made a bunch of products, but it had almost unlimited potential by the time everyone had interacted with everybody, for people to keep evolving and connecting in with their products and existing in an ecosystem that was independent of us, that we provided for them. So that was our first step in, because we wanted to take the learnings from, one, will people buy these things? Will this hypothesis of gamers and esports fans are likely to buy these kind of digital things? Yes, they were. And how did they want to interact together, and how could these products evolve? So you don't just buy the NBA Hot Shot card or whatever. I actually don't know too much about the program, but you buy your one-off player card and you own it, and that's cool, and it's one of one, and Cristiano Ronaldo's got a digital signature on it, and I own it, and that's cool. But it ends, that experience ends. And then you're keeping it either to resell or just to say you have it. How can the experience not end? That was the main hypothesis we wanted to drive with our first NFT program. So I think somebody might have been the previous one saying, what did we want to get out of it? That learning. And Dave, your point around where those people are going to be, who are those people, how do you reach them? I'm not quite the expert, but my hunch is that's where all the big blockchain companies are trying to do, is to have the biggest constituent base of users they have, so that then all these experiences that we're creating sit on their platforms, and we create a symbiotic relationship where we're talking to our consumers with our products and interacting within their platform environment, much like you would have communications on Twitter on that platform, or LinkedIn on that platform, or in the iSport Connect chat on this platform.
Yeah, that makes sense, Leo. And I'm actually going to just start pulling in a couple questions which build upon some of the things we've been discussing. Ron's got a question about the engagement of grassroots, sports and esports, and I'm going to tie it into the concept of identity, and how blockchain can then have that identity of a fan coming into the ecosystem. It's almost like it's giving access to a new range of fans that may not have had a point to become at least known, or at least, if not completely known, at least being able to be someone unique that's participating in what you're creating. Any thoughts on the concept of identity and grassroots and bringing them up the chain into your world?
One very specific thing is what I think an application would be amazing at is if, let's say, we were organizing a huge Rocket League tournament in the UK, and there was a grassroots process or a league or a competition. The biggest clear thing you're actually going to want is verification of results and competition. I played Sunday League and still do sometimes, right? So I remember the grass forms, and he'd tell the referee what the score was, and he calls some guy in an office, and he tells someone, and he tells someone. You can't afford for that in gaming. It's digital, it's connected. So authentication of results is really key. And a key big point for anything when you get into that breadth of scale, and it's applicable for all things in esports, is endpoints. You've got players that might be competing for quite a lot of money. They're playing remotely, maybe they're playing in a stadium, maybe they're just playing at home in this grassroots competition or tournament. You kind of need, I think someone on the previous panel was talking about security and protection of endpoints, and it's applicable for all of us now. We're remote working, right? And we've all got work on our mobile phones, and when people don't reply to your email, they WhatsApp you, and blah blah blah. You've got these endpoints for these big enterprise companies like Accenture. They've got to close them all off. And actually, I think security and protection of them is also applicable for esports, about just protecting those endpoints. To me, I think it would be like authentication of results and access to the digital platform for people to actually compete in the first place. That's where I think it would go on grassroots, because that's where you've got huge breadth.
Yeah.
Much like any sporting pyramid.
Yeah, it makes sense. Heading to another question here by Daniel, and I think this is probably more relevant for you, Emma, just because it's, he's asking a little bit more on some of the cost savings and some of the other applications outside of NFTs for the blockchain. You've mentioned supply chain during this conversation. Can we maybe drill in a little bit deeper on where there's some cost efficiencies by moving things onto the blockchain?
Yeah, in fact, and actually, if I take an example, which is a real example that was done. So Maersk are a very large shipping company, and you can read about this because this is a public story, and they did a big partnership with IBM to use blockchain to digitize one of their port operations in one of the Northern European ports. And they basically created a consortium of which IBM and Maersk sat at the heart of it, but it involved a whole load of actors, from the people who owned the goods that were in the containers, the people who were managing the containers, the ship owners who were doing all the logistics. And that worked well enough before any of it was digitized around a blockchain solution. But with the blockchain solution, they could suddenly reduce the amount of time that goods were sitting within the port, because they could manage the interlock with customs and everything else much more quickly. And because they brought this consortium of users together, and they brought a tech ecosystem partner in as well to help pull all of that together, they suddenly could create something really different. So if we go back to something like a supply chain example, there's a supply chain solution that was developed to help provide coffee growers in remote parts of Latin America and Africa to distribute their coffee to the West, where most consumption happens, without it having to go through lots of layers of management, which is stripping value away from the coffee growers. And that's a really good example of where it was done with the intent to help drive the value to the producer, but actually just took out a whole load of handoffs in the middle. Now, if you think about what's important within the supply, and the supply chains within the sports industry, there'll be multiples and they'll all have different priorities. But if you start to think about an individual supply chain and the priorities that sit, and then you think about who's going to benefit from the value that sits by making that more efficient, where's the cost saving going to come from, who's going to benefit, then you can suddenly start to think about, just as Maersk and IBM did, you can think about all of the players the actors who would sit within that consortium, who will then contribute to create the cost saving. And I think that's how you need, when this is sort of relatively fixed group of players who want to become part of a consortium, it's a really great example of where the distributed ledger technology can really create value. And plus, it's making it harder for the fraudulent actors to come in. In the coffee example, the coffee quality gets preserved because when you buy your coffee, wherever you buy it, where it came from, because it's got that digital signature across it. And I think that these are quite good examples to think of different ways that there's value within the sports industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that. I know we're getting close to the end of the time here. I just want to probably turn it over just to you two for some closing thoughts. What's exciting you for, I guess, this year? Just what are you doing this year, coming out of a very trying 2020 that's capitalizing on some of the technology that we've talked about, and what's really going to excite you as we move into 2022 and beyond? Any thoughts there, just to leave with?
Sure, I can go first. Oh no, you go, Leo.
No, I said.
Oh, okay. So I have to say, I'm really excited about the Olympics at the weekend starting, and I'm really excited about the way we're going to see 5G taking a much more active part. And I think it's going to be entirely downplayed because there's not going to be a big audience there. But I think it's where you're starting to see when you look at what was done in some of the trial events, seeing digital interacting with analog in a sporting context to create whole new experiences for people. I've specialized for a long time in the telco sector, and having seen some of the pilots that were being run around that, I think it's super exciting, and it plays into this whole value associated with NFTs. And I think we're going to see a lot of that happening. And as people get back into sports, I think we'll see this into sports, not just into being in stadiums. I think the opportunity to unlock more value within stadiums, and then take those value moments that have been created in digital, whether it's just the video content or whether it's combined with, some mixed reality, and to create something that's a net new value. I think there's a huge pace going to happen, because people have been away, and you start to create willingness for people now after the last 18 months to invest differently and spend differently. So that's what I'm really excited about. I think that whole viewer interlock is going to happen, and I think it's going to happen fast.
Yeah, I think for me and for us, blockchain, it's like the early days of the internet. What people are using it for now won't be what they use it for forever. I wouldn't like to presume what people were doing on the early days of the internet, but I think if you look back now and looked at what the technology hasn't really changed the internet, right? There's used 5G, and it's kicking on, but the technology behind it is the same. What we use the internet for is completely different. It's not a bad parallel for blockchain. About the question earlier was, will blockchain be able to replace what we already do and make it more cost effective? Yes, but there will be different inflection points and tipping points when that becomes practical to do so, as Em was talking about. And how can it also be used for additive? And as a startup, esports, new tech, sports and entertainment, pioneer, innovator, nimble, we're generally looking at additive. Sports industry, I imagine, will go, okay, tickets, that's quite easy because we get rid of fraudulence, and maybe we add a bit more experience when you arrive, and okay, that's a nice application for something to replace. And then you go content, and then maybe you go, okay, well, what could be a bit new with it? But for us, it's additive, because we're already in an additive ecosystem. So for us, where that's going to get to, we'll be hoping to knit around multi-year propositions around these digitized, gamified experiences of content or products or whatever those things might be, that actually really build an ecosystem of community that own and exchange and interact, but also benefit our stakeholders. We're a league owner, we're a rights owner. We have teams that participate in our league. We have players that play in those teams. The teams have to earn money, and then they have to pay the players, and then the players have to compete. And that's our ecosystem, and that's a lot of sports rights holders' ecosystem. So if we create something that is content-based, experience-based, that knits those players, those teams, and our league and our content ownership and media rights together, it can actually, it could even potentially redistribute automated-wise. I think somebody was talking about smart contracts previously in the last panel. We could actually have smart outcomes based on purchases and exchanges of team bases and fans and the users that actually really neatly equally distributes. So, the Premier League model is based on, we bring in X money and we distribute X percentage to our teams broadly, right? Actually, how much further beneath that can we go now with digital to make it earned, experienced, and have a bigger outcome for all those participant stakeholders, players, teams, and the league and media owner through the product we create? So that's where we're hoping to get. Focus on the experience, focus on maximizing this new digital economy and that digital experience that contained within it. So that's what we're excited about. And for the UK amongst us, we're also excited about clubbing, right? So that's apparently what we're excited about.
Absolutely. Well, look, thanks very much, Emma. Thanks very much, Leo. Great conversation. I hope the audience got a lot from it. I certainly did. And I'll turn it back over to Bethany.